All right, welcome everyone. I'm Jessie. I'm going to be your presenter today, and you are here for part one of a two-part series called Strength and Differences. So today we're really going to focus on neurodiversity, and then for part two, we're going to get into disability and the ADA. So as some of you know, these are two distinct things, but there also can be some overlap. We're going to talk about that today as we wrap up. Now, this is really for managers, and I've designed this in a way that you are meant to view it with other people. So, assemble your folks. I would say for each part, I would set aside about an hour. That's really to make sure that you have time to watch this content and also you have some time to have discussion with each other. So, that's my recommendation. I also just want to call out, I'm going to link a PDF that's going to be a crossword puzzle. If you would like to print that out for everybody ahead of time, that could be a good idea. And then last but not least, you need dice. And if you don't have dice, just Google how to do a virtual dice roller. It's going to be totally fine. But if you have the real deal, I would say make sure you've got one per 5 to 6 leaders, because I'm going to have you in small groups at the end for the discussion. So I wanted to just say, before we get too deep into this, that your presence today is an accomplishment. Whether or not you see it that way yet, it is an accomplishment because of all of the topics that I have spoken on and trained on. Neurodiversity is the topic that got me kicked off of an international conference roster. Neurodiversity is the topic that got me booted out of a diversity panel, of all places. And neurodiversity is what got me an email response that said, this belongs in a provider's office, not in the workplace. I've also been told it is stupid, and I wish I were paraphrasing, right? This is what's going on right now, okay? Um, Ironically, though, when I have people and I'm talking about neurodiversity, this is the topic that people come to me at the end time and time again, and they say, hello, we should have everybody here taking this course. We should have everybody here attending this talk. And because of that, I keep going out and I do this work, right? I work as a leadership trainer. This is one topic that I speak on, and I'm going to keep going. Okay, I had events that were scheduled this year. So I'm checking. Today is February 24th. I had events that were scheduled this year related to neurodiversity, related to diversity. They've been cut. They've been postponed. This is kind of where we're at. We're at the great pause with what's going on politically. And it's not totally clear to me if this is the new norm and how long this is the new norm for. And I'm still getting people who are reaching out saying, I want to take this stuff. I want these lessons. So here's what I'm doing. Giving you information today that's coming from live sessions that I've done, live sessions that I had planned to do, right? If you want to share this with other people in your company, you're welcome to do this, right? Because today we're really talking about what neurodiversity is, and we're starting to get into the conversation about how to leverage this as a strength within your organization. Now, some of you know me. Hi again. Some of you have no clue who I am. So if that's the case, again, I'm Jessie. And in terms of my background, I've got a dual master's degree in social work and business. I want you to imagine that these disciplines collide with each other. What's right at that collision point? Arguably, it is neurodiversity, right? How do we leverage all this difference for strength in an organization to fuel innovation, to fuel creativity? Right? How do we look at this as an asset and not a liability or something to be managed, to be dealt with? Okay. So you could look at this and say, okay, perfect. You got a good educational background for this. This must be why you love this topic. My interest in this topic does not come primarily from academics. My interest in this topic is this is my own survival story, my own professional survival story, because I am 37 and at age 35, I got diagnosed with ADHD. And for any of my late diagnosis friends who are out there, you may understand this experience of going, what? 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 Right? It can be so hard in certain ways. You may have strengths that are so extreme in certain ways, and you're just wondering, why am I not fitting in with others? Why does this feel so different for me. And so I have had to figure a lot of things out on my own. I want things to be easier for other people. I have a vision where managers are creating environments where everybody's brilliance can shine. This is what I'm on fire about. This is why I keep doing this work because I love workplace innovation. I love this stuff, right? We have to talk about the difference in brains to talk about how to leverage these strengths to get to a different kind of outcome. And if you work for a company that relies on creativity and innovation to make it in today's marketplace, this is for you. This is your survival story. So that's why we're here. I just had to start off this way so you know where we're coming from, right? So we're going to dive into it. So let me go ahead and share everybody's favorite slide. Everybody is always like, Jesse, this one is so good. It's so interesting. The visuals, I love everything about it. Folks, it's the disclaimer. The disclaimer is I am not a therapist. I don't practice as a therapist. I am not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. A lot of times when I speak on neurodiversity, there are questions that come up or people that are like, "Ooh, do you do you think I don't know. I don't know." Right? But if you have questions about you or you want to get more information to share with someone else, please reach out to the appropriate people. That might look like talking to your primary care physician. That might look like talking to a mental health provider. But I would really reach out to experts and see if you can get some support. Okay. Got a clicker that just, I think it retired. Okay. So here's my recommendation. I would pause right here and I would find a partner in the room and I want you to fill in the blank. The one thing that helps me work at my best is da da da. This could be I have to have my coffee. I have to have a clean desk, a clean environment. I got to have my workplace bestie that I can give that virtual high five to, whatever that thing is. So go ahead and pause and give yourself just a couple of minutes to talk this through. Okay. Welcome back. So I want you to imagine for a moment, let's just say that you are a coffee drinker. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're in a work environment where you can't have any more coffee. There's no coffee pot, there's no access to coffee, but you still have to work. Okay. And you've got that pounding headache. And you're like, how can I concentrate without the caffeine? Or you need that really quiet environment and you've got chaos everywhere. You got cell phones that are playing music, you got people dancing, and you're still somehow supposed to do data analysis. These might seem like they're exaggerated. These might seem absurd, these scenarios, but for some people, this is their experience. They are in a work environment where they don't have what they need to be able to do their job well. So this could be because they don't feel comfortable asking for an accommodation, or they've asked for one and they got denied. Right? We don't really know, but it's an environment where people don't have what they need to just get by. Okay. So as you imagine what this would be like for you, maybe you've lived this, right? But for other people, maybe this truly is going into this place of imagination here, and you can feel that you would not do well. You can sense that. What we're talking about as leaders is how to create a work environment where people can thrive. This is about changing the environment, not changing the people. I'm going to let that one sink in. Okay. So, with that in mind, we're going to talk about what neurodiversity is. So, here's the definition according to Merriam-Webster, everybody's favorite light reading. Individual differences in brain functioning regarded as normal variations within human population. I've got normal variations in bold here. These are just differences in how brains work. Now, you might say, well, duh, we are all different. There's variation in nature, there's variation in brains. But this term, neurodiversity, is really significant because it marked a change in the dialogue. So, this word came from the Australian sociologist Judy Singer, who is on the autism spectrum. And what's so important about this is a few things. One, it really shifted the conversation away from just talking about autism or autism spectrum disorder, as we now call it, to bringing in all this different type of variation when it comes to the brain. Okay, that happened. The other thing that happened is we kind of shifted in the conversation in many cases away from this medical model strictly of there's a deficit, we need to fix this condition, to being able to acknowledge that there are strengths and maybe we really want this difference. So it was a really powerful moment in history. Okay, that's 1990s. So, what is neurodivergent? Here you can see having or relating to a disorder or condition that impacts the way the brain processes information, its variations in typical neurological development. So you can think of it this way. We've got neurodiversity, which is this umbrella. And then under the umbrella, we've got differences in the brain. And for some people, they are considered to be neurodivergent, meaning that they have some sort of variation from the norm. Don't worry, we're going to break that down. Hold on. Right. But there's some sort of variation from what society considers to be the norm. But here's the thing, right? With that variation, again, there are strengths that come with this. We're going to explore that today. So, yeah, we have some people that really excel in certain areas. We have other people that have really particular struggles that they need some accommodation or support with. We've got a blend of all of that going on. But high level, that's what we're talking about with neurodivergence. Now, you might have heard other terms here. So, this would be a really fun place if you want to hit pause and talk to the people that you're sitting with. What are some of the other terms that you've heard? And then I'm going to share with you things that I've seen, things that I've said. Okay. Welcome back. So, some of the words that maybe you've heard before are neurospicy. I like that one. That shows up a lot of times on social media. Neurodistinct, neurocomplex. Maybe you have some other terms and phrases that have come up. I do think it's important to remember that words can really shape the way that we view ourselves. They can also shape the way that we view other people. Now, for me personally, I like neurodistinctions as a term. And so you may hear me use that interchangeably as we go forward when I'm talking about neurodivergence. Okay. So I want to go back to this definition for a moment because I don't know if it's the Thai food or I don't know if it's this term, but I have a little bit of heartburn. I have a little bit of heartburn because we're talking about variations in typical. So, typical, what are we talking about here? How much of a variation is this? Well, this is the stat that you've probably seen if you've ever looked up. Like across the world population, 15 to 20% of people are found to be neurodivergent. Okay, okay. Do we think this checks out? As a late diagnosis ADHDer, I have some suspicions. I have suspicions that there are people that don't have a diagnosis. They're not going to get a diagnosis because they don't want to go down that route. Could be because there's stigma. Could be that they're not going to pursue a diagnosis because they don't even know that there is anything to diagnose. And I think, my experience with ADHD is a good one to use as an example here because as a female, my experience with ADHD did not look like what I heard of as ADD or ADHD at that time, right? The image that was always painted to me is like, this is somebody that's super, super hyper and crawling all over the furniture. I was crawling all over my mind, not the same thing. So there's a lot of people that I think are not sure. They're just not sure, right? And they could be neuro questioning. They're not really sure, but they're probably not reflected in this figure. It's also a little bit puzzling to look at the stat because there are different ways that people define what falls under that umbrella of being neurodistinct or neurodivergent. For some people, it might be what you more typically hear of, right? They're looking at figures related to autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyslexia. But there are other sources that are bringing in chronic mental health conditions, generalized anxiety disorder, chronic depression. So if you've seen rates around anxiety, you know that this would probably up this quite a bit. So even if we say that 15 to 20% is probably conservative, we can just say right now, right here, right now, this is a lot of people. This is a lot of people. Okay. On top of the fact that what is typical, anyways? What's typical? What's normal? There's a social element of this constructedness of this term of what typical is, and I'll show you what I mean. I want you to go back to the days before the pandemic, right? And I want you to think about how life has changed. What's normal today, 2025, that was abnormal before the pandemic? You can hit pause here and talk about this with your colleagues. Right? There's a lot of stuff. Right? People are out wearing masks. I remember as a former healthcare leader and somebody who has issues with my immune system, it was always very odd for me to walk down the hall in a hospital with a mask on. People would look up like, "Ooh, what she got?" Right? It was also really hard to find work from home. I even had to pay money for this website because I was like set on doing this. I paid money for this job website that had like the 10 work from home jobs listed. It was all insurance companies. And I was like, "Ugh, right? It was just so hard to find. There are so many changes in what we consider to be normal. So if we know that normal is a social construct, we've really got to ask the question, what's the point of talking about any of this? Why do we sit here and talk about neurodiversity? And this is a great point to pause and ask each other this question. What's the point? I'm going to give you my answer. From my perspective, there are a lot of people that fall under this umbrella of being neurodivergent. And here's what this has felt like for me. It's felt like being in this work environment where you feel like this really shiny, intricate, interesting looking key, and it just doesn't unlock any of the office doors. Okay. You want it to. You want to get into all the places that other people are trying to get into. So at first you're like jamming the key in, it's not working. Then you get this idea like maybe I could just sort of shave it down, make it look like a regular key. And this is where we have to get into the conversation around masking. So masking is camouflaging emotions, preferences, and reactions. And it can be conscious or unconscious. There's a lot of different reasons that people would perhaps choose to mask. Okay, sometimes this is a safety thing. Sometimes this is to be able to advance professionally. Sometimes this is just to avoid any sort of judgment. Now, what does this look like in practice? It could be somebody that is going to force eye contact, right? They don't normally want to, but they're going to do it because they want to behave like anybody else does. It could be somebody who normally has some sort of stimming behavior and they're going to try to suppress that. So, when I use that term stimming, I'm talking about self stimulatory behavior. And what this refers to is repetitive movements, repetitive sounds, repetitive actions that are used to regulate your sensory inputs, to calm yourself down, to express your emotions. Now, this can look all different ways. This could be people who have hand flapping. It could be people who tap. That's something that I love to do. The other thing that I personally love to do is auditory stimming, which for me is wearing headphones and I listen to the same song over and over. I swear, if you saw my streaming service stats, it's like 3 songs that I've played 100,000 times, and then there's everything else, right? It shows up different ways. But a lot of times people will try to hide that stuff. And for me, what that looked like is okay, I don't want to tap in front of people. So I'm going to sit on my hand and I'm going to pinch the back of my leg, which obviously hurts. And, I pulled together some quotes here. These are from folks who are on the autism spectrum. And I think it really shows just the difference that comes up around reasons for masking. So I'm going to read these to you. The first one is I do it automatically, and I've done it since I was a child because I realized quite early on that I was different to other children. And particularly once I got to high school, I realized that if I didn't want to be bullied anymore, I had to pretend I was like other girls. So here, this is an escape from bullying, and this is a behavior that was learned in childhood, and this carries through into the workplace. So this is survival. And similarly, by not disclosing, I do not give people that weapon to use autism as a blanket reason against me or a blanket excuse if they're trying to be kind or protect me. Okay. Lots of different reasons that this can show up. But I really want you to think about, okay, what are the implications? We have people who they're trying to fit in. Well, it can lead to a lot of things that are not pleasant. Distress behavior. There can be a mental and physical exhaustion that comes from this. Because again, imagine if what you need to do is tap, but you feel like you can't tap. Holding that in, suppressing that part of yourself, holding back those emotions can be incredibly difficult. I remember being in a work environment. It had the most awful overhead light. And I would always get like so dizzy and just feel disoriented and panicked. And I would sit in the bathroom and cry at work. Right? It's such a hard thing to not soothe yourself and feel like you can't do that. And that can lead to isolation. You feel like you have nobody to talk to. You feel like you don't fit in. And of course, that can start to get to your self esteem, how you talk about yourself to yourself. Right. And that might be people saying, like, I guess I'm not cut out for this job. I don't know why this is so much easier for everybody else and not me. I don't feel safe here. I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to advance. This is not the headspace where people are going to function at their best. This is not the headspace where you're going to get the incredible creative work that can come from this segment of employees. So we have to be thinking about, okay, how do we create a better work environment? Where do we go from here? Now, before we get into strategy, because I'm going to give you some time to talk to each other about this, I do want to just give some different examples of what falls under the umbrella of neurodivergence. Whoops, excuse me. And to do this, we're going to do a crossword puzzle. So you will find a link for a PDF. Feel free to print this. I would recommend giving yourselves about 10 minutes and do your best not to Google. I know that you can find these answers. Just see what you know. There's no shame in the game, right? Also, this is not the all-inclusive list of things that fall under this umbrella. It's just to see what you're aware of, right? Quick knowledge check. So go ahead and pause here and you can complete that now. And we're back. Okay, so now we are starting with one down, which is dyslexia. I want you to take a look at how many people are affected by dyslexia. I think this is a staggering figure. 20%, up to 20% of the population. This is a ton of people. So many people. And the unfortunate thing with dyslexia is a lot of times there is a misunderstanding that there is something wrong with somebody else's intelligence because they just can't read, write, or spell right. Okay. This is not a sign of intelligence. This is a difference in how somebody's brain processes information. So it can show up with confusion around letters that kind of look similar. So, for instance, God, maybe you read this as dog or vice versa. Okay. You can see this example here. You're sending a message and you're kind of jumbling the letters up. It could also be that there's some confusion in sounds. So, for instance, animal, aminal, right? You're getting a little bit jumbled here. And you can see that this would cause a lot of issues potentially in school and certainly in the workplace. With that said, there's a lot of strength that comes from dyslexia. And so this would be a good place to pause and see if you can name any strengths with your group of leaders. All right. Dyslexia a lot of times is associated with creative problem solving, big picture thinking, and then high levels of empathy. Because if you are going through your life feeling like the system was not made for you, right, you're going to have to find different ways to do things. And you also empathize with people who share that, whether or not it's from dyslexia. So lots of strengths associated with this. Now, if we take a look at two across, I got my clicker back. We've got autism. And I'm just going to pause here and say some of you might be like, okay, why does it say autism and not autism spectrum disorder? I felt like that was a giveaway on the crossword. So I was trying to be subtle, but truth be told, if you use ASD or autism spectrum disorder, you're good. Right. And some of you might be like, okay, what's this ASD stuff? I always just called it autism. ASD made an appearance in the DSM 5 in 2013. And it was in that year that the term Asperger's was rolled under the umbrella of autism spectrum disorder. Now, Asperger's, a lot of times, is talked about as higher functioning autism. And there are still people that will self identify as having Asperger's. And there are still medical providers who use that term because they feel like it meant something that was really important to capture. So, yes, the DSM has changed, but if you hear people who will self identify, it is important to use their language. Okay. So, here you can see the prevalence rates being 2.2% for adults, 2.8% for children. We might be a little bit suspicious about this figure. Could it be higher? Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a condition that's marked by differences in social communication, repetitive behaviors, and restricted interests. I have been hearing a lot more people talk about ASD instead of a spectrum like from here to here as oven dials. And I kind of love this because for each of these things that we're talking about, let's just say challenges with social communication might be dialed all the way up, but repetitive behaviors not so much. Or you might have people that are really seeking out more sensory information, right? They're moving around, they're touching things, they're using fidget toys, like they really like that. You'll have other people though that are like trying to get away from all that sensory information, right? We need headphones or we need special lighting. So it's not linear. There's so much diversity within the spectrum. And you can really see that because if you take a look at these images here, this is the change in symbols related to autism from 1963 up until today. So the first one here, we got a puzzle piece. We got somebody who's crying, and it appears to be a child, right? We really talked about this in terms of children. And then we see the puzzle pieces, but now there's all these different colors. And now we see this ribbon that represents more pride in this. Up until today, we see this symbol that's the infinity symbol. There are so many different ways that this can show up, and we've got this rainbow within that, right? Infinite expressions. Now, if you see people that use prior symbols, again, I think it's important to respect how people self identify. But this really has been the evolution when we look at the symbols that come up here. Hmm. So, possible challenges social communication could be limited in repetitive behaviors. Excuse me, folks. It could be people that have very narrowly defined special interests, right? This is the thing that I'm focusing on. And with that, sometimes there is this hyper focus that happens where I have had clients who are on the spectrum who have told me in one case, somebody ended up in the hospital because he actually forgot to eat or drink water for like days because he was so hyper focused on something. Now that is kind of an extreme story, but this is how dialed in you can get to the work that you're doing or that thing that catches your interest. Now, I want you to think about what some of the strengths are that can come with ASD: pattern recognition, hyper focus, which we talked about, and honesty and consistency. Right? A lot of times, people who are on the spectrum, they are very, very consistent and they're very ethical. Okay, that can be a huge strength on your team. Now, if we take a look at three down, synesthesia. I think synesthesia is just fascinating. It is a sensory phenomenon where stimulation of one sense will lead to the involuntary experience in another. For instance, when you hear music, do you see anything? For some of you, the answer could be yes, of course, I see colors, right? And other people are like, no, what are you talking about? I was recently reading an interview with Pharrell. This was conducted by NPR. And so in this interview, Pharrell was saying that his pitch is so good because he can actually see colors and he's trying to match colors up. Fascinating, right? So it could be music, it could be days of the week. Could also be a rare form of synesthesia where you hear a word and it comes with a taste. So you say pizza, you taste the tomatoes, you taste the cheese. You say tomorrow, you taste vanilla. Now, this is a rarer form of synesthesia, but there are some case studies that show this. So, a really, really interesting experience here. And I want you to think about the strengths with synesthesia. People with synesthesia have been noted to have really high levels of intelligence. They've also got incredible memory because, hello, if you're hearing words and you're seeing all these colors, maybe you remember visually what those words are, and that just gives you this extra strength. And then I think by no surprise, you'll see a lot of creativity associated with synesthesia. Okay, 4 down. This is my favorite word to pronounce, dyscalculia. This is something that affects 3 to 7% of the population, and sometimes people refer to this as the dyslexia of math. Okay. This can show up with issues processing numbers and quantities. And just like dyslexia, this is not any kind of indication about somebody's intelligence. It's just a difference in how the brain processes information, in this case, numbers and quantities. So, for instance, somebody with dyscalculia may have a hard time just instantly recognizing that 5 is smaller than 8. This could also show up in terms of somebody counting money, somebody reading directions, interpreting a map, estimating the distance to something, right? There's lots of different ways that this can become a challenge. And like everything else that we've talked about, there are some strengths that come with dyscalculia. So, for folks with dyscalculia, they tend to have a big picture perspective. They also tend to have creative and intuitive thinking about things. And a lot of times they're really good with their verbal communication skills. Let's take a look at 5 across epilepsy. So, this is something that affects up to 1% of the population, and there is so much diversity within epilepsy. There are different types of seizures. This could be anything from somebody sort of staring off for a moment to having involuntary movement of a limb to having full body convulsions. Can show up so many different ways. Could also be that somebody's had a couple of seizures over the course of their life. There could also be somebody diagnosed with epilepsy that has them all the time. And a lot of times people can't predict exactly when they're going to come up. And that can make this really challenging to manage, challenging to live with. Now, in terms of what can be a trigger for this, it could be flashing lights, could be certain medications, it could be stress. And in some cases, people maybe have an indication, but like I said, in other cases, they don't know what's coming on. And the part that's really hard is if there are people around who aren't familiar with epilepsy, they don't know that this is a seizure, there can be so many misunderstandings. I think it's also important to note that with seizures, there can be some other neurological challenges here. Could be issues like memory problems, mood changes, or difficulty concentrating. Now, what strengths could come up with epilepsy? Resilience. My gosh. If you are managing seizures, you got resilience. That is that ability to bounce back after something difficult. And for some people, they bounce back and they bounce back and they bounce back and they bounce back. Empathy. If you're living with epilepsy, you probably have empathy for other people who have ongoing challenges, ongoing struggles. And you've probably really flexed the muscle of problem solving in your life. So these are all things to consider as strengths. All right. For number 6, we've got attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Now, some of you may know this as ADD. So back in 1987, the year that I was born, the H for hyperactivity was added just for me. Totally kidding on that. It was added in 1987, but the reason it was added was really to better reflect what was going on in terms of research and what we knew about this condition. Now, this is another stat. I just wish I had a tomato I could just chuck at the screen. 4.4% of adults, give me a break. That's my opinion. This is a condition that can show up in a lot of different ways, and there's kind of three major categories to know about. One is going to be the inattentive type. So, people who might get a diagnosis of inattentive type tend to struggle with focus. They might have issues with daydreaming. They might have a hard time tracking in a conversation. They might be losing their keys, their phone very easily. This is not laziness. I want you to imagine, like, inside of your brain, you've got 70 tabs open. This is what I actually have on my computer as well. Um, but like that's what you're going through, right? You have so many tabs open, so many thoughts happening. And so yeah, of course, it's really easy to forget to lock the door when you walk out. Right? That is going to be the first type, the inattentive type. Now, there is also hyperactive impulsive type, and this is what I was diagnosed with. Hyperactive impulsive type, the best way that I can describe how this feels to me is like being in a high-speed car that doesn't have any brakes. So you move really, really fast, and in my case, you move really fast, you break things. Okay. Now, this hyperactivity can show up like physical hyperactivity, like I talked about, this image of somebody that's crawling all over stuff. And I do like to do that. I'm a former circus artist, but it can also just be mental hyperactivity. I shouldn't say just, it's a lot, right? It is the crawling all over your brain. And for some people, including myself, this gets paired very nicely with generalized anxiety disorder. It's just a lot to manage. It's a lot of chatter. There can also be the combined type. So you've got a little bit of both. So, what are the strengths? Well, there can be hyper focus. So, like we talked about with ASD, people with ADHD a lot of times will hyper focus on things that they love. So, yes, if you've known me, if you've worked with me, you have seen the phases. I am somebody that is a hobby collector. I am so passionate about making chapsticks until I want nothing to do with them. Right. And for a lot of us, like as soon as we're not interested, that gone, next, right? We need the next hobby. It's also associated with really high levels of energy, creative energy, and risk appetite. I often think as a speaker, this is one of my strengths. The fact that I can just sort of improvise with a group to me is related to risk appetite and that sometimes lack of filter, just the ability to be in the moment and respond as things unfold. And so there certainly are ways that you can use these things as strength. I would also call out for a lot of people with ADHD, their strength under pressure. So a lot of times I will get called in as the emergency speaker. Somebody backs out of an event and the next morning they need somebody to go live. I get the call because to me, that heightened sense of urgency is actually really fun. It's very motivating. And I'm probably more likely to hit peak performance from that than something that was planned in advance. Okay. That's why I did not practice this one at all before I started to record. So you get what you get. But really, for a lot of us, that helps. That helps us get to peak performance. So number 7 here, we've got dyspraxia. This affects 5 to 6% of the population. And this is a neurological disorder that's often associated with challenges like motor skills. So, for instance, you wake up in the morning, we'll just say you make coffee and you pour your coffee and you drink the coffee, and it's just a thing you do. But for people with dyspraxia, it could be a very different situation. It could be that when you're trying to hold that coffee mug, it just doesn't quite feel right in your hands. And you pour the coffee and it ends up going not where you expected. Or maybe it went into the cup and you're like, whew, got that. And then you just knock it over because of some issues with spatial awareness. So this is really what we're talking about. And it can show up in fine motor skills. So this could be something like writing, cutting, buttoning your shirt. That again, maybe for you, that's something you just do. You don't think much of. But for people who struggle with this, there can be a lot of frustration of just doing the day-to-day stuff. Could also be gross motor skills. So this is like larger things, larger movements, running, jumping, riding a bike. which for some kids, they can just pick up. And then for other people, this isn't a lack of interest necessarily. It just could be a struggle with coordination. And then we also know that there can be spatial awareness challenges. So you might be somebody that stubs your toe all the time. You're bumping into the furniture. You're knocking things off the wall. That might be dyspraxia. So that can be a challenge as an adult, but certainly as a kid. And a lot of times that will come with emotional dysregulation. Right? Things are just really, really frustrating, and that makes sense. So what are the strengths? Again, empathy. Also strategic thinking, because you've got to make a plan for how you're going to get the basics done. So again, I'd really suggest that you don't just think about like, how do we change this person? How do we correct this issue? And really be thinking about your environment. How do you create an environment where all different types of abilities can shine? So I want you to just brainstorm together. What are some of the other distinctions that I did not include on this list? Because this was not the all inclusive. So go ahead and take a moment and see if you can come up with anything else here. All right. So I just want to cue up that we're going to get into disability in the next video. Um, but before we get to that point, I just want to call out there's neurodivergence, there's disability, and then there's this space of crossover. Okay. And I think it's important to remember for anything that we've talked about today, there is intersectionality, meaning that we've got all of these different identities that intersect with each other in this very unique way. And it creates this really special vantage point from which we are viewing and navigating the world. So, intersectionality comes from Kimberly Crenshaw. Have to give credit where credit's due. And so, neurodivergence can be related to disability, it also can not, right? Somebody could be neurodivergent, but doesn't have a disability. Somebody could be neurodivergent. Let's just use autism as an example. So somebody might be on the spectrum, and technically, they may have a disability from that because it interferes with at least one major life activity. Could also be that we've got somebody who's neurodivergent and they've got some totally different disability, right? Maybe there's a challenge related to their mobility. Then we can look on the other side and say, okay, somebody could have a disability and also be neurotypical. So again, you can kind of see how these things can overlap, but we can also pull apart these ideas. Because there are some distinctions here, we're actually going to wrap up with the video content for this first video. And then in the second video, we're going to pick back up, talk a little bit about the overlap, and get a lot more seriously into disability and the ADA, thinking about it from a people leader perspective. So, as a spoiler alert, I'm going to bring in my mom. The reason that I'm doing that is she is a former human resources leader. She worked in city government, she worked in higher education. This is really an area that she has so much experience in professionally. She's done like general assistance work. So I think it's going to be a treat to have her for that. So make sure that you come back for the second video. But before I lose you all, I do want to do one more activity here. And this is where I would really like you to get some dice out. And I'd like you to get into small groups. I'm going to pull up what we're going to do. So I would recommend forming groups of about 5 to 6 people. So for some of you, this is the whole room. For other people, you'll need to kind of assemble yourself in small groups. And you can do this activity now. You could also do this when you finish video number 2. Maybe you repeat it. Let me go ahead and pull this up for you. So we're going to do a little roll and tell to spark some discussion in your group. What I'd like you to do is you're going to roll the dice. You can also do this virtually. Google it. You're going to roll the dice, and then I want you to find the question that is associated with what you rolled. So you can see those questions listed here. Now, here's the thing. You could just jump into conversation, but my guess is you're going to lose out on some voices in your team. Maybe you have people who are introverted. Maybe you have people who just would prefer to have some more processing time. So I would challenge you To have a rule, you all can set this among yourself, maybe 30 to 60 seconds that you're going to agree upon that is your processing time. So you can take notes, you can just think about it, and then start your discussion. This is a really good time to practice offering this time to each other. And I would recommend that you don't stop here. I would recommend that you keep doing this. For instance, if you do an icebreaker in your group, give people 60 seconds to think about it. Also, give them the option to opt out. It's really important. So you'll go through this, and I would recommend to hold, maybe 15 to 20 minutes to complete this activity. And then I will see you all again when it comes time to get into video two, which is going to focus again on disability and the ADA. So thank you all. Again, your presence today virtually is an accomplishment. I'm so grateful that there are leaders like you who are committed to being lifelong learners in this space. I also just want to encourage you to keep in touch with me. You can go to jessiefavre.com. You can also find me on Instagram and now TikTok. That's new as of last week. So I will make sure to list all this information here. Feel free to subscribe. I will put more video content up throughout the year. And of course, if you want to reach out to me, I'll list my email here as well. So thank you so much, folks.